An intelligence product is an assessment about a specific subject in order to help a decision maker make a better informed decision. But how is it produced? Stay tuned if you want to find out. Every single intelligence organization out there has slight variations in their mission and authorities, but what they all have in common is that they are producing intelligence. To achieve this, there is the so-called intelligence cycle or the traditional intelligence cycle. The reason why it's called traditional is because many agencies might not follow that in their organizational structure, but they would still follow that on a conceptual level. This means that you can come across the entire spectrum from intelligence organizations that are literally structured around the intelligence cycle, while others have a completely different structure, but internally everything moves around those specific phases. And although this is not considered tradecraft by many, it's such a fundamental concept that we really need to understand before we go into any other tradecraft topics. The intelligence cycle consists of 5 steps. And the first one is planning and direction. As ancient Greek philosopher Socrates said, understanding the question is half the answer. And this is the first challenge that intelligence organizations have to deal with. That is that they have professionals that they are reaching out to their customers. For example, let's say a minister that wants to understand what their counterpart is going to have in their agenda in their upcoming meeting, or a military official preparing a military operation, and so on. So those functions could be named anything from customer relations to customer gateway or anything else in between. And the purpose is to understand the requirements the customers have and translate that into spy lingo, into what is typically known as IRs, intelligence requirements. Of course, among them there will be some of them that are higher priority. For instance, there might be direct requests from a very senior leader, like let's say the president or prime minister of the country. Or it might be that if you resolve this single intelligence requirement, you could cover multiple intelligence requirements. Those are typically classified as PIRs, or Priority Intelligence Requirements. And once you have those defined, you can move to the second part of this phase, which is the planning. You have the direction, what you want to go after, so now you have to plan how to get after that. What kind of information do you need? You define all of your requirements, and once you have this, we can move to the second phase, the collection. Collection is by far the most publicized part of intelligence agencies. We're talking about how intelligence agencies use their capabilities to collect those intelligence requirements. That could be anything from spy satellites to human intelligence with spies recruiting agents around the world, to signals intelligence, intercepting communications, wiretapping, surveillance, and anything else in between. This is where intelligence organizations, based on their capabilities and resources, will try to fulfill those intelligence requirements based on the given priority. Of course, with intelligence agencies have such a wide scope around the world, there will always be more intelligence requirements than capabilities and resources. This is why in the collection phase is also where we have the so-called tasking, which is tasking specific resources and capabilities to cover specific intelligence needs. For example, we want these spy satellites to be monitoring this specific region of the world for that intelligence requirement. Or we want all of our human resources in that part of the world to try to recruit people that have access to this information because of that intelligence requirement. But once this flywheel starts spinning, you can imagine that there is a lot of information that gets funneled back to the headquarters of that agency. And this is what leads us to the third phase, processing and exploitation. This phase also consists of 2 parts. The first one, processing, is how to get all of this information that comes in all kinds of different formats, from satellite imagery to wiretaps to signal interceptions to human reports that people write, and turn it into something that analysts could use to do their work. This is how to process this information for example, to put it in a centralized database or in some archiving system that is indexed so people can use it. The second part of it is the exploitation. As you can imagine, any piece of information can be used in multiple different ways. And this is what exploitation is about. Let's take, for example, a document that some spy managed to steal and send it back to the headquarters. One approach could be to take linguists or some automated system, translate it, put in some database and make it searchable for your analysts. Another way could be to analyze what paper was used. Does it have any DNA samples on it, any fingerprints? Who had access to it? Does it have any markings that can help us understand this organization? And so on. The same applies of course to digital media. Depending on an agency's resources, capabilities and intelligence requirement needs, there might be simple or more advanced exploitation approaches. But what is important is to differentiate the two. The processing is getting the information into systems so that you can use it, and the exploitation is taking the most out of the information you have. And depending on the media and the information, there might be many different avenues for exploitation. Nevertheless, once all of this information starts to get into the intelligence agency, then it means we can go to the next phase, the analysis. This is the second most popular part of intelligence agencies in popular media, the intelligence analysis. That is, intelligence professionals that combine sciences with art in order to get all of this information and try to do a proper assessment to fulfill those original intelligence requirements. This term, science and art, is typically used for intelligence analysis, since no matter how many scientifically proven techniques are out there that all intelligence analysts are striving to use, from statistic to structure analytic techniques to visualization methodologies to mathematical models and anything else in between, there is always a level of uncertainty that people will have to cover based on their experience, their perception, the knowledge of their area of expertise, and other factors that cannot be scientifically proven. Intelligence analysis is about assessing what is most likely to happen for a specific subject. That means that to some degree is attempting to predict the future. And in a world with so many variables and so many unknowns, no matter how much information you have, you will always have a big part of uncertainty. And this is what intelligence analysis comes in to fulfill. Before we move to the next phase, it's important to understand that this is a conceptual model. In real life, you could imagine that an intelligence analyst might go back to the collectors and ask for some additional resource that could help them make a high confidence assessment compared to what they have today. Or they might give feedback to the processing and exploitation teams that they would like to exploit another vector of the information they have in order to help their assessment. But to avoid complicating matters with all of the feedback lines that are going, let's say that the intelligence analysts managed to find more or less what they needed, and now they have an assessment ready to be disseminated. That leads us to the final phase, dissemination. This phase means how to get the finished intelligence from the analysis and communicate it to the customers in a way that it will not be misinterpreted and will be fully understood to fulfill their needs. There are many pitfalls here that the briefers, as they are typically called, have to take into account. For instance, what communication style does the customer prefer? Do they like a written report that they can study on their own? Do they like a formal briefing? Do they like an animation, a podcast, or something else? Apart from that is also the language that's going to be used. For instance, if your customer is a former intelligence professional, it is more likely that they would know all of the spy lingo. If it is a military official, it is likely that they would be more familiar with military terms. If it's a politician, they might need a different kind of communication. And on top of that, you have to be quite aware of this person's behavior and personality. For instance, if you say in a report that we consider this unlikely to happen, for your analyst unlikely might mean there is a 30% chance to happening, but for your customer unlikely it might mean that there is 0% of that happening. You can see how things can get really out of control in this phase. This is also why there is a lot of knowledge and experience around how this dissemination happens. And we didn't even talk about the procedural things like classifications, managing the information, sharing with other entities, and so on. But in the introduction we call this the intelligence cycle. However, here there is no cycle. In real life, what will likely happen is that once this intelligence is shared with a customer, it is very likely that they will have follow-up questions. And that leads to feedback, which feeds back to the planning and direction and restarts the cycle. And that turns this into the so-called traditional intelligence cycle. Naturally, now you might be wondering, why is this the first episode of Tradecraft Sunday, since it's not traditional tradecraft? The reason is that every single phase of the intelligence cycle has its own little tradecraft. There is of course what most people know about, which is the collection tradecraft, but then you have the data and processing exploitation tradecraft, the analytical tradecraft, the dissemination tradecraft. Even on the planning and direction, there are certain bits and pieces that are more into tradecraft than standard operating procedures. This is why we want to cover this fundamental concept before we go into any specific area and talk about specific tradecraft topics. In conclusion, in 2021, in the Intelligence and National Security Journal, the former director of Britain's GCHQ, Sir David Omand, said the following about the purpose of intelligence agencies. Finding ways to shorten each part of the traditional intelligence cycle has been a preoccupation from the earliest days of intelligence activity. And that shows us how intelligence cycle could be used even in this strategic view of the spy world.